When we think about the Middle Ages, we usually think of knights, castles, and kings. Stories about power, about battles, and about people at the very top of society. But almost nobody actually lived like that. Most people were farmers, people who worked the land every day and whose lives rarely changed in any dramatic way. At the time, they were often called peasants, not as an insult, but because they depended on the land and on other people to survive, and were tied to fields they did not own. They were not written about. They did not change borders or decide the outcome of wars. They did not appear in paintings or chronicles. They were simply trying to eat and to survive one season after another. So today, the question is not who ruled, not which king sat on a throne, and not which war was being fought. It is something much simpler. What was daily life like for farmers? And why did this feel normal to them? Who these people were. We are talking about ordinary people, the vast majority of the population. No heroes, no exceptions, and no famous names. Men, women, and children living in small villages, often for their entire lives. Born there, working there, and eventually dying there. Their world was small. It consisted of a few fields, a village, and a church. These were paths they walked every day and places they knew by heart. What lay beyond that world rarely mattered, not because they were ignorant or lacked curiosity, but because it simply did not touch their daily lives. Their concerns were local, immediate, and practical. Block 1. Work that never stopped. For farmers, everything revolved around the land. Not as a job or a career, but as a basic condition for survival. Each day began early, not because it was healthy or disciplined, but simply because there was light. When the sun rose, work began. There was no choice about work, and no schedule to negotiate. The work was simply there, waiting to be done. Waiting was dangerous, because delay meant loss. Their days were filled with sowing, harvesting, collecting wood, and fixing whatever had broken. These tasks returned every year, in the same order, at the same time. If it rained, you worked differently. If it was dry, you worked harder. The weather was not small talk. It was a power, and it decided outcomes. And nobody thought, this is hard, because there was no alternative to compare it to. This was work, and work was life. Block 2. Living, eating, surviving. Farmers' houses were simple, built for use rather than comfort. Often they consisted of a single room, sometimes dark and sometimes smoky. People slept, ate, and worked close together, sometimes with animals under the same roof. This was not only because of poverty, but because it made sense. Heat stayed inside, animals provided warmth, and everything you owned was always nearby. Food was basic, predictable, and repetitive. Bread, porridge, and some vegetables formed the foundation of most meals. Meals were filling rather than exciting. Meat was rare, not because it was forbidden, but because it was impractical. Animals were usually more useful alive. No one expected variety, and no one planned meals far ahead. Expectations were low and shaped by experience, and that is why disappointment was normal. Block 3. Dependence on others. Farmers were not free, but they were not imprisoned either. They could move, but rarely did. They worked the land, but the land belonged to someone else, a local lord, an institution, or someone distant and unseen. This meant giving up part of the harvest, working for a local lord, and following rules they did not make. These obligations were familiar and passed down with the land itself. They were not questioned every day, and they were not debated. This was not a system farmers chose. It was simply there. For most farmers, it did not feel unfair. It felt unavoidable, like the weather, like the seasons. Block 4. Community and Belief. No one lived alone. The village was everything: help, control, and safety, all at the same time. You knew everyone, their families, their habits, and their histories, and everyone knew you. That was not always comfortable, and privacy was limited, but it worked. In hard times, people relied on each other. Belief gave structure, not answers to everything, but something to hold on to. It offered a way to explain suffering and to endure uncertainty. Not believing was not really an option, not because it was forbidden, but because it was unthinkable. The world did not feel chaotic. It felt hard, but understandable. What normal felt like. From the outside, this life looks harsh, monotonous, and limited, physically demanding and emotionally narrow. But from the inside, it felt different. Farmers did not expect progress, growth, or choice, and they did not imagine improvement as a goal. They expected continuity. If today looked like yesterday, that was a good sign. Nothing had gone wrong. Stability was success. So what was daily life like for farmers? It was a life of constant work, little comfort, and dependence on nature and other people, shaped by repetition rather than change. But it did not feel exceptional, and it did not feel tragic. It felt normal. And that may be the most important thing to understand. Not that their lives were hard, but that they were exactly as hard as expected. And that made them livable.